Hey now folks, my name is Nick from Board Game Brawl, and I am here, top button done button, for another episode of Board Game Basics. This is a series of videos designed to help people who are new to the modern board gaming hobby try to integrate themselves into that world by learning all the different slang and terminology and different gameplay mechanisms so that they have a better understanding of them and the types of games that they might like and might want to try. And today we're going to be talking about deck building games. Now, if you're familiar with my channel at all, deck building is a mechanism that I love. I think it's a very fast, cool, streamlined mechanism that adds a lot of strategic depth while adding just the right amount of randomness. It just gives me a good feeling playing any kind of game that has this mechanism. And I do want to make the distinction that deck building games are different than games where you construct and build a deck ahead of time. Those kind of games, just some examples would be like collectible card games like Magic the Gathering and Yu-Gi-Oh! Or living card games like Netrunner or Game of Thrones, the card game. In those games, while you can play with pre-built decks that either you buy from the store or that come in the base set of these games, you're supposed to at some point actually construct and build the deck, make your own personalized deck ahead of time, and then take that into the game and fight someone else who presumably has their own constructed deck as well. A deck building game is different. A deck building game comes to you in a box that's pre-designed like a board game. You just open it up and can play right away without any kind of pre-building of the deck. How a deck building game works, and there's a lot of different deck building games. They're all different in some way, shape, or form, but they all have the same standard outline of what you do in the game. Every player starts with the same small deck of cards. It's usually between 8 and 12 cards. And these cards are usually just certain cards giving you currency. Some of them may be cards that are victory points at the end of the game, but not a lot of victory points. And some of them are just junk cards. It entirely that have no use whatsoever. It entirely depends on what game you're playing. But you're going to take that very weak stack of cards and you're going to use it to buy better cards. On your turn, you'll usually shuffle up and draw between, depending on how many cards you start off with, 4 to 6 cards every turn. And out in the table, there will be other cards that you can purchase. Now, again, this is different for every deck builder, how this actually works. With some games, it's pre-selected, either randomly or by choice, stacks of cards, each one a different type of card, that have a different cost associated with them. And you can use those starting currency cards that you have to purchase those cards. Or there's some games also have a random row of cards, that individual cards that come out randomly. When one is purchased, another one comes out. It all depends. Now, when you actually purchase one of these cards, it always, or in most cases, will go into your discard pile. Once you run out of cards from your deck, from your original starting cards, and you have to draw more cards, what you'll do is reshuffle every card that you've played and put into your discard pile, which includes the new cards that you've purchased. Therefore, when you go at the end or the start of your turn to draw more cards, you have the random chance of drawing those new and better cards that you purchased before. In this way, over time, as you continue through this process, you're making your deck bigger, better, and stronger. In fact, what you eventually want to do, in many games there is a method of culling or destroying some of the cards in your deck. And this is actually a good thing that you want to do to those starting cards that you have, because those cards are generally much weaker, and when you draw your pre-selected amount of cards, they're just going to be taking up space in your hand. You want to be able to get to the newer, better cards that you purchased faster, and therefore have better turns, because those new cards that you purchase are going to give you better currency, better special abilities. Depending on whatever type of game it is, it's just going to be better for you. And what's the goal of all of this? Well, in most games, it's acquiring victory points. And you're going to be doing this by purchasing other cards that are explicitly for victory points. It might be buildings, it might be plots of land, it might be opponents that you are like opponent cards or villain cards or whatever it might be that you have to destroy. But in any of those cases, you're trying to, they usually are very expensive cards to purchase or fight, depending on your currency. And you have to build your deck up to get to the point where you can have turns where you can actually get enough currency to purchase those cards. And there's also a lot of give and take between when you actually want to do that, because usually those victory point cards don't give you a lot of useful abilities or any abilities at all, and therefore they're only worth points, and therefore when you draw them on your turn, they can be a waste if they go into your deck too soon. So you have to make that decision. A lot of games have that kind of element, but not every game. There's, like I said, there's different types of games. There's some games that are cooperative. There are some games where instead of trying to buy victory points, you're just trying to get your deck strong enough to take out some sort of boss monster or meet some other type of one particular goal, and the first person to reach that goal is the winner. Everything is different. Now let's talk about some of the atypical deck building games. And no conversation about deck building games would be complete without mentioning Dominion. Dominion is the grandfather of deck building games. Deck building in some way, shape, or form was implemented in other games before Dominion, but it is the game that made deck building the central element and really refined it down to a science. Dominion is a pretty themeless game. What you're supposed to be doing is actually taking, like in a medieval world, you're trying to take control of different dominions, essentially, different plots of land, and therefore acquire victory points by doing so. But mechanically speaking, like I said, it's just getting victory points. It introduced the concept of having different piles of cards that you either pre-select randomly or not, and you have a limited amount of actions and buys that you can do on your turn, which your cards will provide to you. You're trying to get rid of the original copper currency that you have, get better currency, use it to eventually build up to buy the most expensive and therefore worth the most points cards on the table. That's essentially Dominion. There's been a ton of expansions for it. It's been refined quite a bit, and even though it's been out for, I believe, like 5 years at least, it has been refined to the point where it's a great game and a lot of people still love it and play it tons to this day, and it will probably be around forever. Now, lots of games have tried to emulate what Dominion has done, and some of them put unique twists on it. I would say that the first major game to change the mechanics of Dominion drastically and actually make an impact and be a popular game for doing so is Ascension, Chronicle of the Godslayer, which itself has had many different expansions, some of them small, some of them big main expansions that you can play on their own, but all of them use the same type of mechanics. This introduced the concept, or perhaps not introduced, but really refined the concept of having a different type of currency. Not only do you have money, which in this case is runes, which you use to purchase better what they call hero cards and construct cards to put into your deck, but you also have a separate type of currency called combat power or fighting power that you use to take out monsters, which will not go into your deck but will give you points and some special abilities for destroying them. This also introduced the concept of having the rotating row of cards that you purchase from rather than having predetermined stacks. There are some cards that you will always have access to purchase, like heavy infantry and mystics, but the rest of the cards that you have the option of purchasing will be this random starting lineup of cards from a central main deck. You never know what's going to come out. When you purchase a card, you'll randomly get another card from the top of the deck, and it might be something you can do something with, or it might not, or maybe your opponent can use it, but there's just no telling. It's very random. But this did introduce also the concept of having more than one action, more than one buy in your turn. You're limitless as long as you have the currency to do stuff with. Another type of game that really sort of turned the genre on its head and introduced some unique concepts is Legendary, the Marvel deck building game. In this game, it is actually cooperative or semi-cooperative, depending on how you want to play it, where each player is trying to build a deck of the Marvel superheroes and chain them together to use, again, two types of currency: recruitment points to get new and better cards by basically purchasing cards, but also fighting power to take out a random lineup of villains. But your ultimate goal is actually to take out the mastermind who is controlling all these villains, like Magneto or Loki or Apocalypse, depending on what expansions you have. And that's eventually what you want to build up to do. And so you're all working together to try and do that, while at the same time trying to be the best superhero by being the one that takes out the most villains. So there's a lot of different takes on the deck building genre, lots of different settings and themes, and every game tries to do something just a little more unique than the other ones. So there's a deck building game out there for everyone. It's not everyone's favorite mechanic, but it's definitely something you should try if you're new to the board gaming hobby. Now I'm going to show you some more deck building games that's aside from the ones I already showed you that you might be interested in. Then we'll come back and I'll give you my final thoughts. Well, that's it for this episode, and I hope that if you've never tried a deck building game before, that this will encourage you to at least give it a shot. If you're like me, the very first time that you play one, your mind is just going to be blown because it's such a unique and cool concept, especially if you're used to playing games like Magic the Gathering and games that are just more deterministic and have these preset decks that you always know what's going to happen. A deck building game, you refine your strategy, you make yourself better as you go, change things up, try new and different paths by buying new and better cards, and all the above. It's just a very fun mechanic, and I think that as we go on, the amount of new soul deck building games that has come out has slowed down quite a bit, but you are starting to see the deck building mechanic get built more and more into bigger, more grandiose board games as just one small aspect of that game. For instance, Mage Knight, the board game, also City of Iron. These are big, epic board games with an actual board out there, but deck building is something that the players do as part of the game. And I think you're going to see more and more of this as time goes on because it is a wonderful mechanic. So my name is Nick. This has been Board Game Basics. And please remember, before you can brawl, you got to know the basics. Take care.